Three bikers in leather cornered my pregnant wife in our driveway while she struggled with bags of groceries. At first I figured it was just some random case of road rage, until I noticed our HOA president, Delilah, standing across the street, grinning like she was binge-watching her favorite drama. I froze at the kitchen window, coffee mug halfway to my lips, watching these discount Sons of Anarchy knockoffs circle Elena. The crunch of gravel beneath their steel-toed boots sounded, like bones snapping, and the stench of exhaust carried through the screen door, burning my nose. The largest of the three, skull bandana, beer belly, the picture of a midlife crisis, stepped so close to my 7 months pregnant wife that her grocery bags spilled onto the concrete. "Lady, your husband's failure to comply has consequences," he growled, reading straight from some script. Elena didn't flinch, didn't cry. She just picked up her groceries, cool as ice, and walked inside. That's when I knew these clowns had no idea what they'd stumbled into. 12 years as a military contractor taught me how to spot threats, gather intel, and neutralize problems fast. And within 3 minutes, those bikers wouldn't be knocking to intimidate me. They'd be begging me to end their nightmare. Delilah was about to learn the hard way. Targeting a soldier's pregnant wife is career suicide. What would you do if bikers showed up to threaten your family over lawn violations? Drop your story. Below, I'm sure your HOA has skeletons too. Let me rewind. My name's Marcus M. Donovan, 45 years old. I spent over a decade running logistics for military contractors in parts of the world where a wrong word could get you killed. My wife, Elena, is 32, a pediatric nurse, tough as nails, and 7 months along with our first child. 6 months ago, we bought into Willowbrook Estates, paid $485,000 for a corner lot because we needed the room. On the surface, it looks like suburban paradise. Neatly trimmed lawns, matching mailboxes, neighbors dutifully scooping after their dogs. But scratch beneath the polish, and you'll find it's ruled like a petty dictatorship by one person, Delilah. Hartwell, she's 52, has run the HOA unopposed for 6 years and treats the neighborhood like her private fiefdom. As a real estate agent, she profits directly from keeping values high, which means anyone who dares color outside her version of perfection gets crushed. Naturally, she lives in the biggest house here, 2.3 acres, $750,000. Coincidence? Not a chance. That's small-town tyranny 101. Our first clash started small. While most neighbors wasted water keeping thirsty lawns alive, I chose drought-tolerant native landscaping. Environmentally smarter, less maintenance, and fully endorsed by the county. 2 days after the work was done, Delilah showed up on my porch with a violation notice. Unapproved landscaping materials, she claimed, as if I'd paved the yard with junk cars. I wasn't about to roll over. I buried myself in bylaws, county codes, and state water regulations. Turns out my native plants weren't just legal, they were exactly what experts recommended. I filed a formal appeal backed with county documentation and environmental studies. That's when the harassment began. Notices stacked up weekly, fence too high, false, mailbox out of compliance, identical to a dozen others. Trees needing pruning, nonsense. And yet, her friends got away with the same violations, scot-free. Martha Kowalski, the sweet 70-year-old widow down the street, slapped with $8,000 in fines for a garden gnome. Trevor and Sage, the young tech couple, constantly cited for their solar panels, equipment that actually boosted their property value. The smell of fresh mulch from my garden mixed with the drone of sprinklers on my neighbors' lawns became the perfect metaphor. Common sense clashing with conformity. When Elena mentioned cars creeping past our house, I installed cameras. Sure enough, I caught HOA board members photographing our yard like we were running some shady operation. Elena just wanted peace. "Can't we just plant grass and avoid the fight?" she'd ask. But I've seen enough bullies to know. Backing down only makes them press harder. Look, this isn't just about us. We're standing up for every family steamrolled by small time. Tyrants who confuse carrying a clipboard with having real authority. The violation notices kept piling up, cheaply printed on bargain bin paper, like Delilah couldn't even spring for quality intimidation supplies. Each one escalated, bigger fines, legal threats, even property liens. But here's where she miscalculated. She figured I'd cave under pressure, like all the others she'd bullied before. Clearly, she had never run into someone who'd managed supply lines in active war zones. 3 weeks after I filed my appeal, Delilah decided it was time to show off her power. She called an emergency HOA board meeting, labeling my supposed offense as dangerous non-compliance undermining community standards. I'll give her this. She knows how to put on a show. Conveniently, she scheduled the meeting for Tuesday at 2 p.m., exactly when Elena was at the Children's Hospital for her shift, and I had a physical therapy appointment for an old shoulder injury. Coincidence? About as likely as Delilah developing a sense of humor. She stacked the board with her usual allies. Bryce, a retired banking VP who treats HOA business like it's Goldman Sachs, and Morin, whose biggest credential is being treasurer. At the country club. With only 4 residents present, 3 of them in Delilah's pocket, they rammed through a motion slapping me with a $20,500 fine plus $50 a day until I fixed my landscaping. Start to finish, the whole thing lasted 12 minutes. I know because I checked the security footage afterward, but Delilah didn't anticipate one thing. I'd actually read the governing documents, every mind-numbing word of all 87 pages. From my military days, I remembered a contractor breaking down the hierarchy, CC&Rs at the top, then bylaws, then rules and regulations. Anything that contradicts a higher-level document, automatically void. Most folks don't realize that loophole can save them thousands. Buried in Section 4.3.2 was a golden clause. Emergency meetings require 72 hours notice. They gave us 48. Delilah had just armed me with the legal equivalent of a sledgehammer. That night, I drafted a challenge so airtight it could have passed federal review, documented every procedural violation, cited the statutes, and filed it with enough certified copies to wallpaper her McMansion. The so-called vote was invalid, the fine meaningless, and their $20,500 penalty carried as much authority as play money. Then I dug deeper, and that's when I hit pay dirt. Turns out Delilah had amended the bylaws twice in the past year and a half without a homeowner vote. The original bylaws, the ones we actually approved, required membership approval for any fine increase over $100. That meant every penalty issued in the last 18 months was legally worthless. Here's where my logistics training came in handy. In the military, you don't just patch a problem, you find the root cause. So I mailed certified letters to all 127 homeowners, laying out exactly how their HOA president had been violating the law. I included copies of the doctored documents, highlighted the discrepancies, and even offered free guidance for anyone who'd been overcharged. The reaction was immediate. Within 48 hours, 23 families reached out. Martha, who'd been slapped with $8,000 in fines over her garden gnomes. Trevor and Sage harassed for installing solar panels that actually boosted property values. A retired teacher named Dorothy had been slapped with a $600 fine for painting her front door the wrong shade of blue. The irony? The official palette listed 17 shades of blue, and hers was unmistakably one of them. Before long, the crunch of gravel in my driveway became a daily soundtrack as neighbors stopped by to unload their own horror stories. Each account more absurd than the last, each penalty more blatantly unlawful, the scent of coffee blended with the rustle of paperwork as we pieced together 18 months of systematic harassment. By week's end, I'd gathered enough evidence to dismantle Delilah's entire scheme. But she wasn't about to back down. Once she realized the number of residents pushing back against her authority, she panicked and escalated, threatening property liens and calling mortgage companies, claiming phantom violations were tanking neighborhood home values. Classic bully tactics. When control slips, threaten total destruction. My counterstrike was precise. I rallied the affected homeowners into a formal coalition, secured shared legal counsel, and began laying the groundwork for a class action suit targeting 18 months of unlawful fines. Game on, Delilah. Her retaliation was swift and petty. Within a week of my legal filing, she brought in Executive Protection Services, which was just 2 men in polos driving a white Ford Explorer with magnetic decals. Their assignment? patrol the neighborhood with special focus on my property, since apparently my drought-resistant landscaping was now considered a dire threat to suburbia. Every morning at 7 sharp, they'd park across from my house, watching, scribbling notes. One even issued me a trespassing warning for walking on the public sidewalk bordering the community's shared space. No joke, they tried to bar me from the walkways in my own neighborhood. But here's where Delilah miscalculated. I recognized one of the guards from my morning runs. Big guy, buzz cut, ex-military written all over him. His name was Jimmy, a veteran of 2 tours in Afghanistan who'd turned to private security afterward. Once he realized I was former military too, our small talk got interesting. He started sharing details, like how Executive Protection Services was owned by Delilah's brother-in-law, Russell Hartwell, and how their contract explicitly called for making certain homeowners so uncomfortable they might move away. Jimmy even showed me phone photos, guards hassling old Martha about her garden gnome, intimidating the young couple with solar panels, tailing Elena to her car before work. The taste of metal filled my mouth as I watched security footage of them shadowing my pregnant wife. But anger without a plan is just noise. I needed leverage, not an outburst, so I launched my own surveillance op. Years of military logistics taught me that information is the ultimate weapon. I documented every violation these rent-a-cops committed, operating outside their licensed zone, harassing without cause, failing to wear ID badges, breaking at least a dozen state laws. Jimmy let slip something even uglier. Serious intimidation had been subcontracted to a local motorcycle club called the Ironwood Riders. Not true bikers, just weekend posers led by Delilah's nephew Randy, a 28-year-old fraud convict still holed up in his mother's basement. Their obnoxious exhaust notes became the neighborhood's unwelcome alarm clock. Meanwhile, I was building the one thing Delilah never anticipated: a united community. It started small, casual meetups at Murphy's Diner on Main Street, where the coffee's strong and the booths are older than most of the patrons. First meeting drew 7 people, the second, 18. By week 4, 47 residents packed into that diner, swapping stories and plotting strategy. That's when I met Phyllis Brennan, a retired attorney itching for a real fight since her firm had pushed her out. At 72, sharp as a tack with silver hair and a courtroom presence that could rattle seasoned lawyers, she offered to take on our case pro bono, part boredom, part hatred of bullies. We also gained Diego Ramirez, a former city councilman, who knew exactly which officials to contact about HOA violations. Diego brought the one thing we couldn't buy: connections to local media and an insider's grasp of city politics. While we were busy getting organized, Delilah was busy turning up the heat. She lodged noise complaints with the city over my lawnmower, even though I only ran it on Saturday mornings, well, within legal hours. She tried to shut down my consulting business at home, citing zoning issues, even though I barely met clients twice a month and caused less foot traffic than a neighborhood card game. She was flinging accusations left and right, hoping one of them would stick. But each desperate attempt only armed me with more evidence. I filed a formal grievance with the state's HOA Oversight Board, backing it up with proof of illegal rule changes, selective enforcement, and financial misconduct stretching across Delilah's entire 6-year reign of intimidation. Then came the turning point. I was scanning my security footage from the night before when I stumbled on something that froze my blood. Delilah meeting her nephew Randy behind the community center at 11 p.m. The audio from my directional mic caught everything, word for word. "Whatever it takes to get them out," she said, slipping him a thick envelope of cash. "I don't care how. It just needs to be clear that family isn't welcome here." Randy tucked the money into his pocket and nodded. "Don't worry, Aunt Del. They'll get the message." Right there, I had her nailed for conspiracy and deliberate harassment. But instead of relief, I felt the same tense readiness I used to feel before a mission. This wasn't about HOA disputes anymore. Delilah had just taken aim at my family, and it was time to show her what war really looks like. The strike came on a Thursday morning. I was at physical therapy for my old shoulder injury when Elena was unloading groceries, organic produce, prenatal vitamins, the kind of things you'd expect from a pediatric nurse preparing for motherhood. She was softly humming one hand resting on her 7-month belly, when 3 Harleys rolled into our driveway like they owned it. Randy, flanked by 2 biker wannabes in leather vests and skull bandanas, closed in on her with the overblown swagger of men who'd peaked in high school. The lead one, Jake, with prison ink and a stench that probably carried beer and regret, stepped so close Elena had to press back against the car. "Ma'am, your husband's causing problems for the community," Randy recited, clearly parroting, lines from a script his aunt had fed him. "If he doesn't comply with property rules, there are going to be consequences, serious ones. Here's the thing about Elena. 7 months pregnant, boxed in by 3 bikers, and she never flinches. No tears, no pleading, no fear for them to feed on. Just a calm nod, gathering her groceries with regal composure before walking into the house like a queen dismissing a crowd. The second the door shut behind her, she called me. "Honey, I think our HOA problem just got a whole lot worse." Within 30 seconds, I was in my truck, flooring it home, adrenaline sharp on my tongue. By the time I pulled in, they were gone. Elena was shaken, but safe, already writing down every detail she could recall. Smart woman, she knew documentation would matter. That's when 12 years of military logistics training kicked into high gear. In just 3 minutes, I made the calls that would change Randy's life forever. First, my friend Marcus at the State Patrol, who ran the bikers' plates. Second, a contact at the district attorney's office who specialized in intimidation cases. Third, a private investigator who still owed me from my contracting days. The results came in fast and perfect. Randy had an active warrant for unpaid child support. Jake was violating parole by riding with known criminals. And Tommy, the third guy, had skipped out on court-ordered anger management sessions. All 3 of them were staring down the possibility of real prison sentences if the wrong people started asking the right questions. And suddenly, those people were asking. My phone rang at exactly 3:17 p.m. It was Rye's girlfriend, calling from the county jail where he'd just been booked on an old warrant. "Please," she cried, her voice breaking. "Whatever you did, just stop. He's got kids to take care of." 20 minutes later, Jake and Tommy shuffled up to my porch. Not on their bikes this time, but on foot, shoulders slumped, hands buried in their pockets, eyes fixed on anything but me. The sound of their boots against the boards was cautious, almost apologetic, a far cry from the cocky bravado they'd carried that morning. "Look, man," Jake stammered, struggling to find words. We just want to say we're sorry. Things went way too far. Rye's girl said you might be willing to cut us a break if we cooperated." I let them sweat it out for a full minute before stepping aside. "Come in. We need to talk." "What?" They told me over the next hour would have made any prosecutor break into a grin. Delilah had handed them $500 in cash to deliver a message to my family. She had specifically instructed them to corner Elena while I wasn't home, deliberately, targeting a pregnant woman to scare her into pressuring me to back off. It wasn't just harassment. It was premeditated, and there was a paper trail thicker than Rye's rap sheet. Both men agreed to give sworn statements if I promised to let the DA know about their cooperation. I recorded everything, documented their willingness to testify, and suddenly I had the ammunition I needed to completely dismantle Delilah's life. But the best part? Word of Rye's arrest spread across the neighborhood faster than gossip after Sunday service. Neighbors who'd been suffering quietly under Delilah's reign of intimidation started to realize resistance wasn't just possible, it was happening. You could feel it in the air, rebellion mixing with the smell of evening barbecues as small groups gathered, whispering about finally taking a stand against the tyrant next door. Delilah's empire was cracking, and she knew it. That evening I spotted her peeking out from behind her curtains, probably trying to figure out how her foolproof intimidation plan had turned into such a spectacular failure. 3 minutes, that's all it had taken to turn her big threat into a total disaster. But I wasn't finished with Delilah Hartwell, not by a long shot. While she was busy hiring bargain bin bikers to threaten my family, I was doing what contractors like me do best, digging through paperwork until I uncovered the smoking gun. It began with a Freedom of Information Act request to the city's planning department. Sounds dull, right? Wrong. What I found buried in those dusty municipal files made her embezzlement look like pocket change. The original Willowbrook Estates Development Agreement, signed in 2018, required that 15% of all residential lots be set aside for moderate-income housing, affordable homes for teachers, nurses, firefighters, the people who actually keep a community alive. Out of 85 homes, that meant 12 should have been affordable. How many did Delilah's company actually build? 0, not a single house priced under $400,000. Instead, she convinced the city council that market conditions made affordable housing impossible and promised to pay $600,000 in lieu fees over 5 years. But here's the kicker. She never paid a cent. The city had been sending her collection notices for 3 years, and she'd been ignoring them like overdue credit card bills. And it got worse. Remember those outrageously high HOA admin fees? I followed the money through 6 years of financial records, each step like breadcrumbs leading to a gingerbread house made of fraud. Over $340,000 in HOA funds had been siphoned into Hartwell property. Solutions, a shell company she owned. The HOA budget set aside $50,000 a year for legitimate management costs. Delilah was charging nearly $60,000 annually to her own company for services that were either grossly inflated or never even performed, phantom landscaping jobs, security contracts that bypass competitive bidding rules, consulting fees high, enough to embarrass a Fortune 500 CEO. Martha, our coalition's volunteer bookkeeper, spread the records across my dining table like she was reconstructing a crime scene, the smell of fresh coffee mixed with the quiet rustle of papers as she pointed out one damning entry after another. "Look at this," she said, tapping her finger on the page. $4,500 for emergency tree removal in January 2023. I'd spent that month driving every street in the neighborhood, documenting storm damage for insurance claims. Not a single tree had been removed. The scale of Delilah's corruption was staggering. For 6 years, she had been quietly siphoning resources from our community, intimidating anyone bold enough to question her. But the irony was beautiful. The harder she clung to power, the faster her empire unraveled. If the city decided to strip our community of its incorporation status for violating the development agreement, home values could plummet 20 to 30% overnight. That collapse would take Delilah's real estate empire with it, dragging her personal fortune into the ruins. On top of that, she was staring down potential criminal charges: fraud, embezzlement, breach of fiduciary duty. Offenses that could mean federal prison time and asset seizure. That evening, Elena found me at the kitchen table, papers and bank records spread out like a battlefield. "You look like you've seen a ghost," she said, settling down beside me with her cup of tea. "Not a ghost," I answered, holding up a bank statement showing HOA money funneling straight into Delilah's personal account. I had found our nuclear option. The balance of power had shifted. Delilah thought she was defending her authority, but in reality, she was fighting to stay out of prison. Every move she made only pushed her deeper into legal quicksand. But instead of striking immediately, I held back. The people deserved to see it for themselves, to understand how she had manipulated and robbed them. They needed to watch her downfall unfold and take part in rebuilding something stronger. Revenge served hot burns out quickly. Justice served cold. Now that lingers. It was time to plan the most satisfying HOA meeting our community had ever seen. Dining room became the war room, buried under evidence enough to convict a corporation. For 2 weeks straight, my house turned into mission control for the most important operation of my life. Not because of national security, because it was about something more fragile and more valuable, the future of our neighborhood. Phyllis Brennan was always the first to arrive. At 72, briefcase in hand, she carried enough legal firepower to make federal prosecutors cheer. She moved with the sharp precision of someone who'd spent decades cutting bullies down to size in courtrooms. "I've been practicing law since Nixon was president," she told me one night while sorting evidence folders. "Never seen fraud this bold in a residential community." Next came Diego Ramirez, bringing political savvy and media reach that couldn't be bought. Former city councilman, now grassroots organizer, he had the instincts of a man who knew exactly which reporter to call for maximum damage. Watching him move through municipal records was like watching a pianist play, his hands flying as he uncovered connections that would make our case airtight. Then there was Martha Kowalski, sweet elderly neighbor by day, forensic accountant by night. With her glasses perched on her nose and a calculator older than most of our laptops, she traced every stolen dollar with the patience of someone who had balanced church budgets for 30 years. The steady scratch of her pencil became our nightly soundtrack, charting 6 years of theft. Trevor and Sage, the young tech couple with solar panels, handled the digital front. They built a secure database of evidence, cross-referenced financials, with dates, and crafted a presentation so sleek it could have come from a Fortune 500 boardroom. Their laptops hummed quietly in the corner, transforming numbers into undeniable stories. Our plan took shape like a military campaign. Phase 1. A forensic audit by a CPA specializing in nonprofit fraud. $2,000, split between us, but worth it for independent verification. Phase 2. File complaints with city, state, and federal authorities at the same time, making sure Delilah had no chance to destroy evidence or escape. Phase 3. A community meeting, complete transparency, with proof no one could dismiss. Phase 4, democratic elections to install new HOA leadership, with constitutional safeguards to prevent this from ever happening again. On a Tuesday morning, Phyllis filed the whistleblower complaint with the state attorney general. Moments later, we submitted documentation to the IRS for tax violations. The smell of certified mail and manila envelopes filled my kitchen as we packaged evidence for multiple agencies. "We're not just after justice," Phyllis said as she sealed one stack. "We're making a record that ensures this can't ever happen again." Martha's audit uncovered horrors worse than we had imagined. Payments funneled to shell companies like Hartwell Property Solutions for work never done. Fake vendor invoices for projects that only existed on paper. Personal expenses run through HOA accounts, Delilah's luxury car lease, her country club dues, even her private indulgences. Even a trip to Hawaii masquerading as a property management seminar. That was part of the total siphoned off, Martha revealed during a late-night strategy session. $480,000. Almost $6,000 per household that should have funded neighborhood improvements. Diego worked his media contacts, shaping a rollout strategy to control the story. "Timing decides everything," he reminded us as he refreshed his press list. "We only get one chance at maximum impact. Miss it, and Delilah spins the narrative." My assignment was logistics and psychological warfare, military style. I drew up timelines, with backup plans for every possible countermove Delilah might make. Evidence was duplicated and stored in multiple secure locations. Communication protocols ensured nothing leaked. And above all, I built in psychological pressure designed to keep her cornered, unable to run before facing justice. The arsenal we'd assembled was devastating. 847 pages of financial records proving embezzlement, video and audio of secret. Meetings and intimidation testimonies from 73 homeowners, expert analysis from the forensic accountant we'd hired. Delilah's counterintelligence, on the other hand, was laughably weak. She sent her friend Morin to eavesdrop at our coffee shop gatherings, only to be spotted instantly. We began feeding them false leads, making it look like we were focused only on minor bylaw disputes. Delilah bought it, assuming the legal challenge was procedural. She had no clue a federal investigation was already closing in on her financial crimes. The waiting period strained nerves. Elena, 8 months pregnant, kept us grounded when the tension peaked. "Remember why we're doing this?" she'd say. "Not for payback, but so our daughter grows up in a community built on honesty and respect." Meanwhile, the evidence pile kept growing. Bank statements showing shady transfers, emails tying Delilah to her shell companies, contractors admitting they were pressured to pad invoices and funnel money back. Within 2 weeks, we had enough to topple 3 political careers and send someone to prison for a decade. The taste of imminent victory was sharp and electric, like the breath before a flawless military strike. It was time to show Delilah what happens when you endanger a soldier's family. The community was about to learn what real justice looked like. Her paranoia peaked when neighborhood whispers confirmed something big was brewing. Backed into a corner, she lashed out with the boldest power grab in HOA history. A sudden, emergency special assessment, demanding $5,000 from every household. supposedly to fund legal defense against frivolous lawsuits. Notices landed on Friday afternoon for a Monday evening meeting. Classic Delilah. Short notice, heavy pressure. She was counting on apathy, low turnout, loyalists pushing the vote through unopposed. Her pitch dripped with manipulation. She warned that radical elements were threatening property values. With nuisance lawsuits, the $5,000 fee she claimed would bankroll elite attorneys and investigators to protect the neighborhood. The veiled threat was obvious: pay or your home values collapse. For families already stretched by inflation and property taxes, $5,000 might as well have been $50,000. But Delilah believed fear would outweigh reason. I let her dig deeper. Every violation, every intimidation, every desperate lie was documented for the final takedown. My cameras even caught her Sunday meeting with Bryson Marine, where she laid out plans to funnel HOA funds into her personal legal defense, a federal crime that would add years to her sentence. Monday's meeting drew 89 residents, the largest turnout in the community's history. Delilah stood at the front, jittery, eyes darting, her bravado replaced with manic energy. The smell of stale coffee mixed with nervous sweat as she launched into her script about existential threats. "We're under attack by outside agitators who want to destroy our community," she barked, pointing straight at me and Elena. "These newcomers moved in 6 months ago and immediately started filing complaints, spreading chaos and threatening lawsuits that could bankrupt us all." The lies poured out like water through a cracked dam. Mac was a serial troublemaker. Native landscaping was a health hazard, lowering property values. Coalition meetings were illegal conspiracies to overthrow legitimate governance. Then, Martha. Kowalski stood, 70 years old, silver hair, cardigan neat as ever. Her voice carried Sunday school authority. "Delilah," she said, "before we vote on any assessment, I formally request a full financial audit of the last 5 years." The room froze. Delilah's face drained as Martha continued. "I want independent verification of every administrative fee, every vendor linked to board members, and all emergency expenditures beyond the budget." The silence was deafening. Neighbors who'd never questioned the board suddenly wanted answers. Delilah muttered about unnecessary bureaucracy and trusting leadership. But the damage was done. The vote collapsed spectacularly. 102 against, 3 in favor. Only Delilah and her 2 cronies supported it. As people filed out, I overheard conversations that warmed me, neighbors finally asking the right questions about their money. Delilah struck back with venom. Over the next week, she launched a harassment campaign worthy of a dictator, anonymous code complaints against dozens of homes, false zoning violation reports targeting my consulting business, efforts to shut down the playground with fabricated safety claims, rumors that I was under federal investigation for unnamed crimes meant to isolate me from allies. Her retaliation was ruthless, but desperation was starting to show. The woman had completely detached from reality, striking out blindly at everyone around her, like a drowning victim dragging others beneath the surface. But this was where Delilah's clumsy schemes collapsed spectacularly. She brought in a licensed, private investigator to dig into my military history and finances, expecting to uncover scandals she could use to destroy my reputation. Instead, the PI confirmed I had a spotless record and a solid, legitimate business career. Even worse for her, his investigation accidentally exposed more of Delilah's own misdeeds, hidden bank statements, shady business ties that broke conflict of interest laws, and a trail of corruption stretching back to her former community. Bound by professional ethics, the investigator had to step back and safeguard the evidence for possible criminal cases. He even phoned me directly, apologized, and urged me to contact the district attorney about the serious financial crimes he'd stumbled upon. The irony was exquisite. Delilah had actually paid someone to unearth dirt on me, only to hand prosecutors fresh ammunition against herself. Every frantic move she made only sped up her own unraveling. Meanwhile, our neighborhood grew more united by the day. Signs reading, "We support transparency," popped up in yards. The neighborhood watch evolved into informal support groups for families Delilah had targeted. A GoFundMe raised $12,000 in just 2 days to cover legal fees. The pressure cooker was building, and I was the one holding the trigger. Then came her last desperate ploy. Just 3 days before our planned community presentation, Delilah filed for a restraining order, claiming I had threatened her safety using intimidation tactics I'd supposedly learned in the military. This from the same woman who once sent bikers to menace my pregnant wife. She now played the victim with a performance worthy of an award. Her so-called evidence included doctored audio of me making threats, fabricated witness statements from neighbors who barely knew me, and a tearful declaration about feeling stalked by a trained killer. The drama was so exaggerated. Her own lawyer seemed embarrassed submitting it, but I'd anticipated this stunt. My security system had logged every encounter between us, producing crystal-clear proof that blew apart her false timeline. Forensic audio experts confirmed her recordings were crudely edited, sloppy cut-and-paste jobs that wouldn't fool a high schooler. The hearing flipped into her worst nightmare. After seeing my counter-evidence, her attorney dropped the petition. The judge even suggested Delilah might want to consult a criminal defense lawyer about filing false reports. Watching her storm out of court, I almost pitied her. Almost. Next, she tried to weaponize the media. Delilah pitched Channel 7 News a sob story about a veteran supposedly terrorizing an elderly woman, complete with staged tears and trembling claims of fear. At first, the reporter seemed sympathetic, until I delivered our thick evidence file. Within a day, Channel 7 pivoted completely, not to cover her harassment claims, but to investigate HOA corruption and financial fraud. Suddenly, the spotlight was on 6 years of embezzlement and abuse of power. Delilah's Victim Act had collapsed into a PR disaster. Meanwhile, our coalition ramped up. When Delilah tried to cancel our school venue by inventing security threats, we simply shifted to Sacred Heart Church's Fellowship Hall, doubling capacity and inviting city council, the press, and law enforcement to attend. The night before our presentation, Delilah's last loyal ally broke. Bryce, the retired bank VP who'd signed off on years of shady transactions, showed up at my door looking shaken and defeated. With trembling hands, he passed me a manila envelope stuffed with damning records. "She threatened my grandkids," he whispered, glancing nervously over his shoulder. "Said if I didn't stay quiet, she'd expose my past bankruptcy and ruin my family. I can't live like this anymore." Inside was devastating proof. Direct HOA to personal account transfers, emails plotting how to conceal missing funds, recordings of Delilah openly intimidating board members. Worst of all was Bryce's signed confession detailing 3 years of financial manipulation and witness tampering. He vowed to testify publicly and give sworn statements to federal investigators. The walls were closing in fast. The Attorney General's office confirmed an ongoing probe into HOA financial crimes. The IRS launched audits on 6 years of nonprofit filings and unreported income. City attorneys reviewed violations that could mean millions in penalties. Even the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit expressed interest in mail fraud charges. Amid this, Storm Elena, just days from her due date, made a choice that stunned everyone. She insisted on attending the presentation despite the risks. "This is about our daughter's future," she said, calmly packing her hospital bag as a precaution. "She deserves to grow up in a community built on integrity." That final evening, I felt unexpectedly calm. Weeks of planning and documentation had brought us here. The evidence was airtight, the community stood strong, and justice was within reach. Delilah, by contrast, barricaded herself in her mansion, refusing interviews and reportedly drinking heavily. Neighbors overheard her screaming on the phone. Her lawyer had already abandoned her. The stillness before the storm was almost serene. Tomorrow, the truth would finally come out. 6 years of theft, bullying, and corruption exposed. Delilah's empire of fear was about to collapse under the weight of her own actions. And from the ruins, we would build something better. But first, she would have to face the truth in front of 300 neighbors, city leaders, and cameras. Justice was coming, and it was going to taste sweet. The Fellowship Hall at Sacred Heart hadn't seen such a crowd since the Christmas pageant. 312 residents filled every chair, lined the walls, and spilled into overflow rooms. City Councilwoman Patricia Williams took notes in the front row. Detective Martinez from Financial. Crime stood by the exit, badge visible. Channel 7's crew lit the hall like a studio, and in the back sat Delilah Hartwell, alone. Her once loyal circle had vanished, leaving her isolated among hundreds of neighbors she had spent 6 years bullying and robbing. She looked as if she had aged a decade in 10 days. On stage, Elena sat beside me, 8 months pregnant, yet radiating a quiet, powerful strength that reminded everyone what this was truly about. Not just money, not just property values, but the future of the community we wanted for our children. I stepped to the podium, scanning the familiar faces I'd come to know during months of coalition building and investigation. Martha, with her unshakable determination, sat front and center. Diego scrolled through his phone, keeping up with media updates. Trevor and Sage clasped hands as though they were watching a historic moment unfold. Phyllis Brennan sat poised, her legal files lined up like weapons for a battle she'd been, preparing to fight her entire life. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, my voice carrying clearly through the crowded hall. "Tonight, you're going to find out exactly where your HOA fees have been disappearing for the last 6 years." First slide of our polished presentation flashed onto the screen like an explosion. It was a side-by-side chart comparing projected administrative expenses with actual spending, revealing deliberate inflation that drained nearly $500,000 from the community. The sharp intake of breath from 300 people felt like oxygen. "Being vacuumed from the room, $480,000, I pressed, letting the figure hang in the silence. "That's about $6,000 per household, money that should have gone into upgrades, proper upkeep, and reserves. Instead, it was funneled into shell corporations owned by one individual. From there, the proof poured out like an unstoppable landslide, fabricated vendor invoices for projects that never happened, personal charges billed to the HOA account, bank records of direct transfers into private pockets." Each revelation provoked louder murmurs from the audience, the energy shifting toward something that felt almost revolutionary. Then came the smoking gun, the audio recording captured behind the community center. Delilah's voice rang out over the sound system, instructing her nephew to threaten my family, whatever it takes to get them out. The crowd's reaction was instant and visceral. 300 faces turned toward Delilah, as though she had just confessed to murder in the middle of Sunday service. A voice from the back shouted, "Shame!" And soon the entire hall was echoing with the chant. That's when Delilah lost control. She shot to her feet, her face blazing with fury and desperation, jabbing her finger at me like I was the devil. "Incarnate! This is all lies!" she shrieked above the roar. "This man is a dangerous military extremist trying to tear our community apart. You people are too stupid to understand complex financial management." The insult clung to the air like poisonous smoke, calling her own neighbors stupid while being unmasked for stealing their money. It was the kind of downfall Shakespeare himself couldn't have staged better. Slowly, Martha Kowalski rose, her calm church lady voice cutting through the chaos. "Delilah, dear," she said evenly, "I've been doing community bookkeeping since before you were born. These aren't complicated finances. This is plain theft." The applause thundered for a full 2 minutes. When it subsided, witness after witness stepped up to the microphone. Martha described years of being pressured to conceal financial irregularities. Bryce admitted he'd been threatened after raising concerns. Associates of Rye testified via video that they were paid to intimidate families. 23 homeowners shared stories of targeted fines, bogus penalties, and harassment meant to silence dissent. Each testimony added another stone to the mountain of evidence burying Delilah's credibility, but the breaking point came when Detective Martinez stood. "Ms. Hartwell," he announced in his firm police voice, "based on the evidence presented tonight and ongoing investigations, you are under arrest for filing false police reports, conspiracy to commit harassment, and fraud." The sharp click of handcuffs around her wrists was the sweetest sound I'd heard in months. As officers led her away, still screaming about persecution and witch hunts, the hall rose in applause. Not out of cruelty, but out of deep relief, a neighborhood finally freed from tyranny. Channel 7's reporter interviewed residents live in the parking lot. "This," she told the camera, "is grassroots justice in action, a community uniting against corruption, and winning." The emergency vote was unanimous. Dissolve the HOA board immediately, elect interim leaders with strict financial oversight, and pledge full transparency going forward. That night, the old order collapsed, replaced by one built on democracy, not dictatorship. As we left the fellowship hall, Elena squeezed my hand. "Think she finally got the message?" she asked with a weary smile. I glanced at Delilah's empty chair, then at neighbors buzzing with plans to rebuild the community the right way. "Loud and clear, sweetheart, loud and clear." 6 months later, I strolled through what had once been Delilah Hartwell's backyard, pushing my 8-week-old daughter, Hope, in her stroller. The land was now a breathtaking memorial garden, alive with native wildflowers and drought-resistant plants, the very kind that sparked this whole conflict. Behind us, the once foreclosed McMansion had been reborn as the Willowbrook Community Center, its windows glowing with meeting rooms where openness replaced oppression. The legal reckoning had been almost poetic. Federal Judge Patricia Casey sentenced Delilah to 8 years in minimum security prison, declaring, "Financial fraud against one's own neighbors is a profound violation of community trust." She was also ordered to repay $680,000 plus interest and penalties, ensuring she'd remain broke well into her 70s. Randy, her would-be biker enforcer nephew, received 18 months and 3 years of community service teaching motorcycle safety to teens. Ironically, accountability unearthed his gift for guiding young people away from the very path he had taken. Her old house, where she once ruled like a suburban dictator, sold at auction for $420,000. The new democratically elected board purchased it using recovered funds, money that should have gone to the community long ago instead of financing her extravagance. Every stolen dollar was returned, interest tallied by Martha's meticulous records. But here's the real victory. Property values climbed 12%, not because of oppressive enforcement, but because young families now sought out Willowbrook for its transparency and neighborly spirit. Word spread quickly that this was a place where people supported one another instead of living in fear. My consulting business skyrocketed after Channel 7's follow-up stories went viral. Communities from Arizona to Florida asked for help tackling their own HOA corruption. Elena teases me, calling me the HOA whisperer. I prefer to think of myself as someone who helps ordinary people fight institutional bullies with their own weapons. The ripple effect still astonishes me. State Senator Margaret Torres introduced the HOA Reform Act after hearing our story, mandating annual independent audits and financial transparency statewide. The law passed unanimously and has already uncovered corruption in 47 other neighborhoods. Sometimes one community's victory sparks dozens more. And then came the Willowbrook Scholarship Program, fully funded with the recovered theft money. Just last month, its first awards went out, $12,000 each to 5 local students, pursuing careers in education, healthcare, and public service.